Hi, everybody. I'm Lucy Beednell with the ARC of Northern Virginia. We are so excited to be here with Eric Feig of Feig Mediation Group, our major sponsor today, as we talk about supported decision making. This is such a critical topic for people of all abilities, including people with disabilities. It's something that often comes up as people reach around the age of 18, but there's never too soon a time to start talking about it and never too late. Without further ado, I'll bring up some slides and we'll go right into today's presentation. Again, with thank you to Feig Mediation Group for sponsoring and for joining us today. It is a rare treat to have someone who's an expert in mediation be on with us as we talk about this topic, and we'll really let them take a big lead as we get to the question and answer portion of our session, since I know that's an area where so many families have questions. Supported decision-making is something that the ARC of Northern Virginia is very passionate about, and this presentation was originally designed as part of a grant with the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities and the Burton Blatt Institute of Syracuse University in a collaborative partnership. Today, we'll talk a little bit about the basics of supported decision-making. What exactly is supported decision-making? Can I use it with other kinds of supports? And why would I? Then we'll get into some of the trickier kinds of things, the what if questions. If I use this, what happens when? Or I have concerns about this. Then once we're feeling a little bit better about this option, we'll move right into how to get going with supported decision making and some concrete tools to start putting it in place, and give some examples of supported decision making in practice, as well as some resources for you to explore this more on your own time. We'll also take questions then, so remember at any time during the webinar, you can type a question into the Q&A box. At its most basic, supported decision-making is having people you know, love, and trust help you understand and make your choices. And this is part of everyday life for essentially every single person on the planet. I've never met someone who didn't talk to a spouse, a family friend, a family member, as they talked about changing jobs, buying a car or a house, right? Those are the kinds of times when we feel like, oh, this is a big one. I got to pull in the helpers in my life, those folks I trust to help me work through this. The decision is still my own, but their input is going to help me make that decision. In that sense, supported decision-making can be really informal, what we all do when we just take advice from others, get their input and their help. Supported decision-making can be a little more formal, and we'll talk more about that today, when on a regular basis, we know maybe someone has more helpful needs in making choices and understanding choices, putting those choices into action. So maybe in that case, we'll put together a real plan and a team for how to do it. Supported decision-making is an appropriate choice for people of any and all abilities. Like we started talking about here just a moment ago, it's certainly appropriate for people with no unusual support needs. There's no adult or child in this world who knows everything and who can make their decisions without consulting experts or folks that they trust, right? Not that we always do it, but that's how we learn to make our best choices, right? And in that sense, absolutely everyone uses supported decision-making. For folks with disabilities who may have a little bit more trouble cognitively understanding their choices or otherwise implementing their choices, supported decision-making is a great choice. It preserves their rights, and we can layer it in with other tools, things like powers of attorney that mean a trusted parent, family, friend, or advisor can co-sign with them, can be present with them, can be a part of the team with them. A representative payee to help manage Social Security benefits, or a special needs trust or ABLE account to help manage other kinds of finances. There's all kinds of ways that we can layer in types of supported decision-making along with levels of legal authority to make sure that we've got what we need to understand and make our choices. And I think it's also important to note here, supported decision-making is just as important for individuals who have very significant support needs, including those who already have either limited or full guardians. Virginia law and best practices are very clear in saying the job of the guardian is not to say, the objectively best decision is this, and that's what we're always going to choose. No, of course not. Who lives their life that way? The job of a good guardian is to know the person with a disability, to care about them, their culture, their preferences, their needs and interests, and use those to help them guide in their decisions. and to engage that person with a disability in making and implementing those choices as best as possible. That's supported decision-making by another name. Why should we consider this option, thinking about supported decision-making? And the best answer I can give you come from data. Now we have more than 40 years of data that show folks who use tools like supported decision-making have more self-determination, more determination and power in their own life. And that matters so much because those folks tend to be more independent and safer. One of the big questions we get when we're talking about legal authority, especially as someone is approaching age 18, is how do I keep my loved ones safe? The answer to that, according to a lot of years of study, is we support them. We preserve their rights. We empower them to be as independent and in control of their own life as possible. And in any areas where we need help, we get that help. People who use tools like supported decision-making have a greater quality of life. And we're also then really respecting the dignity of risk. That part in all of us that knows sometimes to learn good choices, you make bad choices. Sometimes it may take someone with a disability more bad choices or more failed attempts than a typically developing peer. And here I talk a lot about how if you are a family who had multiple children, maybe some with disabilities and some without, you may have realized it was important for everybody in that family to learn to walk or talk or communicate. And your typically developing children may have grown those skills right at the expected milestones with very little effort from you, and things just went swimmingly. If your child with a disability needed a lot more help to reach those milestones, had more failings at first, really struggled with the concept, we don't give up on them and say, you're just not going to get there. We say, this is important. I think you can get there, and we'll just keep working at it. We'll adapt it, and we'll get there eventually. And that's the same idea as supported decision-making. It's important to all of us to be able to make those choices that teach us along the way how to be our best selves. From a civil rights perspective, supported decision-making is so important because in and of itself, it doesn't take away any of someone's rights. And that preservation of rights is so important to our self-identity as humans. And I mentioned at the beginning that we started this project with attorneys from the Burton Blatt Institute at Syracuse University. And I'll say a really striking moment for me was working with one of those attorneys who said, I found that the average individual with disabilities under guardianship has significantly fewer rights than a convicted and incarcerated felon, right? We still naturally preserve a lot of civil rights for people who have convicted of crimes and even those who have been incarcerated, or we know they'll get them back. And that's not the case for people under guardianship. The taking away of rights is a very serious business that we should never undertake lightly. And one of the great and practical benefits of supported decision-making is there's little to no cost. Supported decision-making in and of itself is free, asking for opinions, right? Weighing those choices. Sometimes you may choose to layer it in with tools like a special needs trust or power of attorney that have a low cost, but much cheaper than guardianship. Supported decision-making can also be put into effect right away. In fact, we're all already doing it. And that's kind of the point, right? All of us already get input from those around us when we're understanding and making our choices. And we get away from a sense of, I am a person with a disability and my parents are my only helpers, or I'm the parent and I'm the person who does everything for and with my child, to a system of growing a network. We're no longer putting all of our support needs in one person's basket so that we burn that person out, so that we're really at risk if that person is no longer able to provide those support services because they're hurt themselves, because they pass away, because they're just no longer able, right? We're building a whole network around us. Also so important to note that Virginia law, the National Guardianship Association, and best practices are very clear in saying, before you pursue a restrictive option like guardianship, you must first explore less restrictive options. And they name supported decision-making as one of those options. Virginia has made it very clear in law that supported decision-making is already legally allowed. Virginia's had a work group that supported the benefits of supported decision-making and encouraged others to use it. That's required guardians ad litem to explore this option before they put guardianship in place, and has required Virginia public schools to present options on supported decision-making. This is a very long statement that you don't need to read, but I will send a PDF of these slides out to folks. And if you're watching this later, you can always reach out at the arcofnova.org/answers to request a copy. But in short, the National Guardianship Association, which is just about the biggest stakeholder in pursuing guardianships there is, says over and over and over, please consider supported decision-making. Please don't take away someone's rights unless you really, truly have explored all other options. Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of the basics of supported decision-making under our belt, let's talk about those tricky questions, the what ifs. And I think first it's fair to say that we are all vulnerable as human beings. Everyone is going to get hurt at some point in their life. People with disabilities tend to be more vulnerable. It's okay to acknowledge that, but we don't want that fear to drive the bus. What we do want is what we know about the person, what scientific data and resources show us, which is the way we keep people safe is by empowering them, preserving their rights, and building support teams and skills around them. There has never been a study that shows the effort of putting guardianship in place in and of itself is what keeps someone safer, ever. What we do know, like we talked about, is empowering people and preserving rights to the greatest possible degree does keep folks safer and more independent and healthier. Supported decision-making, instead, again, of relying on one person, utilizes and builds on the strengths not only of the person with a disability, but all the folks around them in their support network, right? We all learn by making some bad decisions, and so much of American culture in particular is about laughing at them. And I think all the time about how it's not unusual to show up to work and to joke with colleagues about being hungover, about racking up debt and buying Christmas presents, about, eating too much over the holidays and being a little bit overweight, about forgetting to go see the doctor again. And these are common shared experiences, right? And we never look at that person and say, you're overweight. You clearly don't have the ability to manage your weight. What we should do is take you to court. You need a guardian to help you understand what to eat and what to drink and how to spend your money on food. Right? We just accept as part of being human that we're going to make some bad choices, and that's okay. And we want to make sure we're giving that same grace and kindness and respect and equal treatment to folks with disabilities. Let's talk a bit about getting started with supported decision-making. And as I reminded you at the beginning, at the end of our presentation, there'll be a slide when I talk a little bit more about specific resources, and you can either request a copy of that from the ARC of Northern Virginia, see it at our online supported decision-making library, or see it in this presentation live today. So as I mentioned something, don't worry, you'll get access to it later. But let's just walk through some of the options. One of the things I really enjoy is an article from Suzanne Francisco. She's a mom of 3 kids with developmental disabilities, and those kids have very different needs, very different strengths and challenges. And as a mom, she wrote an article called Setting the Wheels in Motion, which is about her journey as a parent, figuring out how to layer in supports for all 3 of her kids. And for all of them, she landed on supported decision-making. So the first part is a parent-to-parent article, but the second part is real worksheets on how to get going on things. We worked with a lot of folks on putting up their supported decision-making plans, and some folks just started saying, I've got some ideas, I'm gonna write them down on the napkin that is in front of me, on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet, on whatever. I've already got a sense of how I wanna do this. That's okay. One of the great things about utilizing supported decision-making in Virginia is there's no one form or format you have to use. You are getting your ideas out there and then implementing them, just like you would a business plan or any other kind of plan in your life. The document I liked most comes from the ACLU, and it's called When Do I Want Supports? It's very simple, and across the top, along the side, I should say, it lists different life areas: medical decisions, financial, relationship, transportation, etc. And with each type of decision, it walks you through, is this an area where I ever need support? Yes or no? If yes, who do I trust to support me? Let's take medical decisions as an example. Perhaps you say the people I trust are my parents, my sister who's a pediatrician and knows all kinds of medical things, and my doctor and the nurse practitioner at my doctor's office because I've known them forever and they really get me. And then the worksheet goes on to say, how do I want that support? And this is where we can start to fill in the really personalized piece. It's things like, I want to go to the doctor's office alone, but I want someone to help me write out my questions in advance. Or I always want to go to the doctor's office with a chart of the human body or a picture of me where I can point to on the body and help understand what's going on. Or I always want someone, and that's my mom or my sister or whoever, to go to appointments with me and to be jointly notified about appointments, reminders, and test results. Whatever that is, that's your place to customize. How many supports do I want and how? Is that a medical power of attorney? Or is that just me asking for accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act to get the support I need? You ideally want a balance of paid and unpaid supporters as you look at your whole team, right? We're always going to have some paid supporters in our life. Teachers, waiver staff, doctors, bankers, all those other kinds of folks, they're going to be there. And we want to leverage them and their skills, but we don't want them to be the only folks on our team. We want people without any conflict of interest, like family members and friends, to be there too. I bet a lot of you are thinking right now, which is when I usually start getting questions, and what about my family members who don't agree? And what about my mom who thinks I can't do anything? And my dad who's divorced from my mom who thinks I should be allowed to do things? And what do we do if I want both of these folks on my team because I love and trust them, but they don't agree? Type in those questions in the Q&A bubble now or hold on to them because Eric can discuss those in great detail at the end of our presentation. That trouble, and he has all the answers. Big promises made here, but that dynamic and troubleshooting piece is a big part of supported decision making. And again, it's a gift to have someone here today with us who can help us work through that. As we're talking about putting supported decision making into action, look at wherever you wrote this down, your napkin, your spreadsheet, your worksheet, and see, do I feel like most of the areas of my life are covered here? I got it all down? Sit on it for a day or two. Then we usually remember, I forgot about Aunt so-and-so, who I don't see that often, but who restores old cars and is absolutely the person I want to talk to if I'm talking about buying a car. I'm going to add her to my list, right? And then once you've got your team assembled, figure out, how do you want to communicate with them? Is that a text chain, a regular Zoom meeting, an in-person chat or potluck or coffee house visit monthly? Is that a shared listserv, a private Facebook group? There are as many options as you would like to pursue, but just making sure you say to those folks, I love you and I trust you. You are someone who I want to help me when I need help making decisions. Is it okay if I call you, text you, Zoom you, Facebook you, whatever you like, when I'm working on something? I can tell you universally the response to that request has been, I'm so flattered. We all like to hear that we are good at things and that we are recognized at being good at them. And instead of when we do things like saying, would you be my next guardian, which involves going to court, spending a lot of money, being exclusively responsible for my choices, filing annual reports, we're saying, you're great at something. Can I ask you about that sometimes? And you'll help me make decisions about that too? It's a pretty low lift, right? It's flattering. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't cost an extreme amount of time. And the folks that you want on your team are people who already know you and care about you. So who should be very willing to invest this additional time in you. And then as you work with this team, figure out, do I think that my level of support is high enough that I'm going to need a power of attorney, which I like to think of as a do with me-er, right? Guardianship is do for me. Power of attorney is do with me. Someone to go with me to appointments, help me understand everything, help me work on everything with me, right alongside me. Or do I just need folks I can consult? And over time, you can keep evaluating it. Ideally, all of us as human beings will have our skills grow over time as we have new life experiences, or sometimes we have life experiences that set us back and mean we have additional needs. Those are great times to start going over, do I have the right people on my team? And is my team working together to figure them out? And again, if not, we'll talk in a second about how to work through those challenges. As a quick note here, in starting this supported decision-making project, we worked with a pilot group of 10 individuals. And for a group of 10 folks with developmental disabilities, we made it as diverse as we could. We had 8 men, 2 women, people ages 19 to 40, a big host of diagnoses present. 5 individuals were non-speaking. 5 individuals used some kind of regular verbal communication. 5 individuals had a guardian in place. 5 individuals did not. And every single person just said, I'm interested in pursuing this idea. And over the course of working on supported decision-making for over a year and saying regularly, do you have who you need on your team? Were they available when you needed them? Let's talk about some decisions you made in the last month. Who helped you understand the choices? Who helped you make the choices? Who helped you make sure your choices came to fruition? Working through those kinds of things over the course of the year was extraordinary. And we saw people become excited and empowered. Every single one of the individuals we worked with who started without a guardian said, I'm so glad we'd made that choice. I can see now I have the team around me to make my choices, and I want to keep doing that. Of the 5 individuals who had a guardian, 1 decided they really needed to keep that guardian, but we're going to keep that layer of supported decision-making in to make sure that the needs and the wishes of the person with a disability were always really driving the team, not some objective best. 4 individuals started to question their guardianship. 3 said that they would like to work on removing it in the next year or 2 in favor of using the tools that they had developed under supported decision-making. And 1 individual said they thought it would take them more like 5 years, but they wanted to get there. What we saw was folks were empowered, and we had a lot more powerful teams and strengths and abilities than we realized. Here are the resources that I mentioned, and I'll walk through them briefly, but remember, you can get all these online. If you go to the arcofnova.org anytime, you can find our supported decision-making resource library, which has stories from individuals who were in the pilot project, 3-minute videos that are really fun to watch, recorded presentations like this one, in-depth presentations from attorneys and others, specialized presentations on supported decision-making for professionals and in financial and healthcare situations. Lots of 1- and 2-page handouts in family-friendly language or plain language, and a way to reach out and ask us questions. There's a National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making that shares a lot of stories and videos. Sample agreements. If you'd rather, instead of starting from scratch or using one of the tools I shared, use a sample supported decision-making agreement, it's out there. And they've got a lot of the research that I cited today. The Center for Public Representation is another national group that has different kinds of forms and stories and tracks supported decision-making laws over the country. And what you'll see is laws and interest in supported decision-making have risen significantly in the last 20 years, and I would say dramatically in the last 5 or 6 years. This is very much the wave of where we're headed. The Disability Law Center of Virginia has a free online power of attorney builder. They can help connect you with an attorney to work on advanced directives and give you information on your rights and choices. There's a fabulous book called Supported Decision Making, and then the tagline is From Justice for Jenny to Justice for All by Jonathan Martinez and Peter Blanc. Jonathan's the attorney who worked with us on our grant. And I love the book because I think it's very, though written by a lawyer, is very family readable and has really great samples of language for powers of attorney, examples of supported decision-making in use, stories of court cases for how guardianship was removed and supported decision-making was put in place or guardianship was avoided. And again, coming from a lawyer's perspective, really working through some of those tricky legal questions that some folks have. The article I mentioned by Suzanne Francisco on setting the wheels in motion is linked in our library. The Jenny Hatch Justice Project is a national project that works on giving information on supported decision-making. Jenny Hatch is a woman with Down syndrome who lived in the Virginia Beach area of Virginia after a car accident that was not her fault. She was put under guardianship and she hated it. And she fought her way out using supported decision-making tools and really inspired the country. And that case was now over a decade ago. And it shares a little bit of her story and information on supported decision-making in Virginia in particular and around the country. The When Do I Want Support tool from the ACLU is linked there, and the ARC of the United States has lots of supported decision-making toolkits. I share all this not because I would expect anyone to read through all of this unless your nerd level is equivalent to my nerd level, which is really up there. But so you know, any way you want to tackle this, it's there. You want a template agreement and to just print it and go with it? We got those. You want to see some stories about how this has happened on video? We got that. You want to read some court cases and hear the legal background? It's there. You want to have some research that shows you this is the right thing? Not a problem, right? Whatever you want, it's out there. Supported decision-making is most definitely the wave of the future and here to stay. So without further ado, I'll open us up to questions. And again, it's a real treat to have Eric Feig from Feig Mediation Group, who are so grateful for being our major sponsor here with us today. So those questions about sticky family mediation, it's a really good one to bring up today. And Eric, as folks start writing in the Q&A bubbles, I would love for you to kind of give us a little bit of background on kind of your work and kind of how you start to deal with those issues when we've got someone with a disability who should be driving the bus, but what we often see are parents who have very different feelings about how much driving that person should be able to do.
Well, thank you. And I think the question that you're asking really boils down to is how do we help people get onto the same page? And we're starting from a place where we assume everybody has the best interests at heart, and it involves a communication, and it involves finding ways and creating ways so that we can have those communications where we can look at where we agree, where there might be disagreements, but to be able to take those points and say, okay, if one of us is over here and the other one is over here, how do we connect them? And that's a conversation, and that's usually something that needs to be done by, having an open mind, being able to ask each other questions, to slow down, sometimes have a little bit more formality in the conversation, especially if we're talking about multiple people being part of that conversation that might have multiple viewpoints. It's how do we get it all on the table? And then once it's on the table, how do we all step back and look at it together to figure out what the right way to go would be? I think it all starts with that.
One of the questions we get often is, who is going to help me do this? And using a mediation group is a great idea, right? Someone who's used to the idea of let's get parties together and let's talk through a tricky subject, either upfront, kind of in the planning, and I'll say more preventative side, or if you really do get stuck and you've got a situation where you've got to have someone help work through some really tricky situations. We got a great question here about whether or not there are significant differences in supported decision-making versus guardianship in Maryland. And I'll say, I actually did a presentation on supported decision-making to a supported decision-making work group in Maryland last month, maybe even this month. My sense of time is a little warped right now. But they are being run out of Disability Rights Maryland. Megan Ruciano is the contact there. And I would really suggest reaching out to Megan at Disability Rights Maryland. She's far more an expert on guardianship laws in Maryland than I am. My general understanding is they are similar to laws in Virginia. So for the most part, supported decision-making works just the same in Maryland as it does in Virginia, right? You've got a team, you're building this team together, you're writing documents together or not, right? I mean, I can't force you to write this down. There's no law that says you have to have it written down. But certainly we're all better off when we have our plans on paper and can go back and check them. And then that's a real option for pursuing supported decision-making in Virginia. And then also there's a question about emergency guardianship proceedings being needed. An emergency guardianship proceeding can happen in a few different situations. If it really is being used correctly, it's often because there has been a very sudden change. So for example, someone went into a coma. Someone has had a catastrophic event or emergency, and whereas before we either needed no decision-making support or we needed some and we were able to get that, we're in a place where really we need the whole enchilada now. Things are very, very different. There's been a change, there's been an accident. That's when emergency guardianship is to be used. And that's kind of life accidents. So honestly, the best answer there is being safe. Emergency guardianship orders can also happen if we have a situation where someone with a disability, either developmental disability or aging related disability, for example, Alzheimer's, all of a sudden we're seeing some changes in behavior, in decision making that tell us, oh, something is different. We've gotten ourselves into hot water here. We can't pinpoint it to an accident or a specific issue, but this person is starting to act erratically or make the kinds of choices they never did before. They're refusing supports, whereas before they accepted them, those kinds of things. And that would certainly be appropriate to go and put emergency guardianship in place. But in general, everybody says, by that I mean the law and best practices and the players involved here, that avoiding guardianship is a great idea, and avoiding guardianship in general can be done with supported decision-making for folks, because we're taking out the current conversation, which is, can you do it alone? No, you need a guardian. Or yes, you need nothing, and changing the conversation to, can you do it with supports? What supports do you need? Let's layer those in. And if we layer in as many supports as we can, we know that you communicate with the letter board, and we did that. We know you need extra time to process things. We did that. You know you need examples and social stories to understand choices. We did that. We layered and we layered and we gave our time and we used the people you know and trust, and we really tried our very bestest to get information into you and answers back out, and we didn't, then it's probably time to pursue guardianship.
If I could build one thing on what you're saying there, which I appreciate, and I think is also very important, is that as you assemble all the supports and you assemble all the resources, also attending to make sure that they're all coordinated with each other and that everybody is communicating. It's wonderful to have a team and to have all of the resources, but everybody is bringing their backgrounds, their experiences, their perspectives. And I think it's so important also as part of your planning and part of your process to make sure that you have a way to keep everybody in the loop and everybody up to speed. Otherwise, it's just a lot of people working within their own lane potentially, and you're just getting a lot of information that doesn't necessarily fit together.
Great point. Okay, so we had a next question that's super important and really practical. So as we look at someone who's pursuing supported decision-making, how frequently should we look at that agreement, those powers of attorney if we choose those, medical documentation, those kinds of things? There's no one perfect answer to that. In general, I would say reviewing legal documents at least every 5 years, and every time there's a significant life change is a good idea. An interesting thing about powers of attorney in Virginia is they need to be signed by the person, in this case, the person with the disabilities who we're talking about, and the person they're appointing as their power of attorney. They're due with her, right? So in this case, we would say, my son and I sign the document. He's the person with the disability. I would be his power of attorney. We're working together as a team. That doesn't get filed with the court, right? I mean, if it's a medical power of attorney, you'll certainly give a copy to your doctor's office, maybe your pharmacy, your local emergency room or hospital, those kinds of things. So it's on file, but there's no mandate for it to be filed with a court or filed anywhere. Giving copies in advance just makes your life easier. And there's no time at which they necessarily expire. In my just anecdotal experience talking with folks who use powers of attorney, it's great if you can show we re-signed it after 5 years, right? This is still current. This person with the disabilities needs and abilities have evolved up or down, and we're still thinking about it and using it. That's a great thing. Re-signing a power of attorney right on the existing document with the same names and dates at the bottom costs absolutely nothing. Taking a copy of your existing power of attorney and doing that, you can go to UPS or your local bank or whatever if you want, and for $5 or free have it notarized to make it even more official, but you don't legally have to in Virginia have it notarized. So just making sure that, especially with like those medical legal documents, at least every 5 years and every time there's a significant change. With the supported decision-making agreement and team, I would say at least annually. There you want to say it over the course of the year. Did I do well with my medical decisions, my financial decisions, these other kinds of things? Did we have the right teams, the right people on board when we needed them? Were the people we thought would be available actually available? Were they actually helpful? And if not, how do we fill those folks back in? Okay. And so another question here about someone with a mental health disability, so schizoaffective disorder, in addition to autism. So something that's a really important tool for folks that have significant mental illness, either standalone or in addition to a developmental disability, is that there's a great tool called a psychiatric advance directive. That's another tool in your supported decision-making toolkit. And psychiatric advance directives are also often called PADs for short. And a psychiatric advance directive is written when the person with serious mental illness is in recovery or remission. They're doing well. They're at a point where they can say, when I'm in crisis, this is what I want to happen. This is who I want to be involved. Here's who I want to treat me. And there's a group actually based in Texas who really headlined using psychiatric advance directives. And they've done lots of presentations across the country and in Virginia in particular in the last few years, showing that this is a tremendous tool, because in our moments of wellness and foresight, we're able to really choose and steer how we want resources in a crisis. And then we get ourselves, in some cases, out of having to appoint an emergency guardian. We're going back to the instructions we wrote for ourselves at a time when we had the foresight to be able to do those. And we're working with the team that we chose to help us implement our own choices. And that psychiatric advance directive is a legal document that can help folks do that. And again, significantly less restrictive and less expensive than a guardianship. I'll think in a moment about the woman's name in Texas who really pushes this a lot. And I'm happy to share some other resources from her, but psychiatric advance directives are a great tool too, that we didn't talk about by name. Okay. Other questions that folks have. Some things I get a lot, in fact, are, we know we needed to pursue guardianship because my loved one has no sense of money. They would just give away money to anybody who asked for it or who scammed them out of it. And what I say here usually is, if we're looking at guardianship, it is important to understand what guardianship is and is not. Guardianship is a court-ordered piece of paper. It is not, as my grant partner often says, it is neither a suit of armor nor a chastity belt, right? It does not follow you around and protect you from harm or force you to make good choices. It can help undo or prevent some legally made choices. A scam is not a legal choice, right? If our loved one or ourselves give all our money over to a Nigerian prince or to someone who comes to our door or someone who asks on the street for money, guardianship or anything in the world does not have the power to undo that choice or to get that money back, right? That money is just gone in the same way it is for anybody who gets scammed. And we're all vulnerable to that, right? There's so many folks across the country with no disabilities all the time who are scammed. So maybe instead of setting the bar at, in order to manage your own money or to maintain your independence away from guardianship, you need to be able to independently manage all financial decisions. Well, let's look at that. Can anyone fall victim to a scam? Yes. And it's very easy to do. Scammers are professionals, like anybody else who does their job really well for a long time, right? So maybe instead we set the bar somewhere differently. And for typically developing adults, we often leverage tools like financial planners or retirement accounts that automatically put contributions in, or our banks has limits on how much money you can withdraw in a certain day. Those are all great tools to help us, right? What if instead of teaching really complex skills, we say, maybe the rule is we never talk about money, share money, or give money away or pay a bill. We never money anything until we, what? Have mom there. Call dad and check. Take a picture of what I'm asked or a video of what I'm asked and text it to so-and-so to get their opinion. Or we say, we're going to set it up with my bank so I can never have a debit card. And the only way to make withdrawals is if a co-signer on my account is there with me, right? There are all kinds of other levels of support you can build in place as opposed to guardianship, where we say, we're not going to set the bar at, you have to independently manage all financial decisions, avoid all scams, never make a mistake. We're going to set the bar at, anytime someone talks about, thinks about, mentions your money, you call, you text, you go with, you whoever, right? And that's a totally different level of skill to master and something that's a lot more attainable for a lot of folks with developmental disabilities. Just something to think about, and that's an example. And so if folks have other kinds of questions about an area where your loved one tends to get stuck or has had issues in the past, feel free to chat them in. There's no one answer that's great for everybody, but we're happy to kind of do some problem solving and think about it. And then you can always work with us or a group like Feig Mediation Group to really work through those on a person by person basis. That's what supported decision making is meant to be, totally customized to the needs and abilities of the person with the disability, as well as the support options that they have around them, formal or informal. And when we worked with some folks, we had supported decision making teams that were very small, parents, a number of paid professionals, maybe a neighbor or a distant relative. And we had some folks whose teams were massive. So some extroverts on our group said, I love all of these people and I trust them and I do talk to them all the time and I want all of them to be a part of my team. And here's what they know about. And they were the kind of folks who were naturally inclined to keep up with those sorts of communications. They loved that relationship and that regular back and forth in communication. They got a lot of soothing from asking the same question over and over, hearing answers over and over from folks. Well, great. That's what a supported decision-making team can be there to do. And now you got a whole team of folks to help do that instead of just one person. Okay, I didn't see any other questions coming in. Eric, any other thoughts for folks as they're kind of sitting and thinking in this?
No, I think you're hitting such valuable points. As you're talking about it, hearing again the importance of making sure that you're taking a team approach. It's collaborative. You're working together. It's all supportive. Being able to make sure that it's not done in a way that's unduly restrictive, but really meets the needs and meets everybody where they are. And to be able to do that in a way that if this is where you want to go, to be able to grow as well and to be able to adapt over time, right? The idea is not to set up rigid rules today that we're going to say are now the rules for the next 5 years, and not to be able to revisit them, not to be able to change them as needed, but to have a set of guidelines that are a starting point, right? And to have a set of resources that help to build upon that and to build that independence, that autonomy, and the learning of the skills and the application of the skills. It's an active process. And as I hear what you're describing, I think it's also important to attend to all aspects of that and to be able to have, again, I'll say like I did before, to be able to have those conversations that are needed to make that happen and to be able to do it in a way that's cooperative.
I want to pull out something that you said and talked about doing this over time, because one of the questions we get a lot is, what if someone leaves the supported decision-making team? What if our financial guru passes away or has a life circumstance that means they can't meet with us regularly? And what are your thoughts as you're working with folks on kind of rebuilding and holding that team together?
Well, I think the what if questions are very important. And being able to ask the what if questions and talk about them before you need to talk about them. You can't predict everything, but to put it together in a way where you have resilience and where when things happen that are unexpected, you have at least a process or an understanding about what you will do and what might be next, or how to come together when you need to say something unexpected has happened. Now what? And to be able to do that in a way that, again, answers the question.
We've heard such neat stories from folks who've used supported decision making or other kinds of circle of support types of models over time, saying, for example, we always met a couple times a year and did a big potluck and talked over big decisions. We were there on call for smaller things, but we wanted the team to be getting together regularly. And as some folks on that team, got to a point where they could no longer be a part of it because of their own age or life circumstances, almost always the person who came to backfill that role was their children who had grown up coming to these meetings and were now adults and ready to be a part of it on their own, right? I can tell you from the pandemic, I have kids. And now, having done a lot of virtual schooling and home learning over the last years, they soak up what's around them, of course, right? And so I'll be on the phone with someone talking about supports, and my 7-year-old will go, "Can they get a waiver?" And my 9-year-old will ask, "Are they using supported decision making?" Right? We are growing our next generation of leaders. So making sure the folks on the team feel comfortable, if you're comfortable, sharing what they're doing with others, talking about it, and that's how you grow your next stock. And if you brought someone on the team because they are a great medical expert, they probably work with and know other medical experts. They probably have a sense of other folks who are kind and compassionate, who may be a good fit for this, and often are planting the seed all on their own for who's going to fulfill their position next. And we don't ever want to let that fear of the future or that determination to be perfect be the enemy of our good right now, right? We're better off with anything. We're better off with starting a team and starting a mindset. And I'll say that once you start using supported decision making, what we see consistently is folks see things through that lens, right? In some ways, this is a worldview. So we start both seeing decisions in a new way. I, as a mom, I'm not just going to sign up on this. We're going to talk about it quickly as a family. We're going to make this decision together, but also, I realize so-and-so who I don't see that often is really great at real estate or just got their real estate license. Maybe they'll be the person we talk to about finding a new home and lease and housing contracts and those kinds of things, right? You start thinking, we need someone in this role on our team, and your little subconscious feelers go out to start grabbing those folks in the universe. And in the many ways that humans are great at making connections, those things tend to happen over time. And we had such cool stories of folks who built their supported decision-making team with a really diverse array of individuals, from, parents and our core caregivers, all the way through the dude down the street at 7-Eleven, because 4 times a week I go buy a soda at the same day and he knows me. And saying to dude down the street at 7-Eleven, like, here's our number. If someone ever comes in and seems like they're not being very nice to this person, we want you to call. You know them. We trust you. That's a tremendous honor and a great way to build supports, to make that person feel like what they're doing is important, because it is, but also to have eyes and ears in the community looking out for someone and giving them the power to know who to call if something isn't going great. And maybe dude down the street at 7-Eleven isn't the person we call when we're making financial decisions, but he is part of our support team about relationships and living a good life in the community.
I think those are all great points. And it also, I think, speaks to, you need a plan A. You might need a plan B. I encourage people to talk about the plan B, the plan C, the plan, whatever, however far down they need to go in terms of the alternatives, to feel comfortable to say what might happen, what might change. And it also, I think you're speaking to the fact that the needs will change and the team may change. You may have a core team that's going to stay fairly constant, but over time you may have others that are coming in and out based on what's needed or based on what you think might be needed. And being able to do that, I think, in a way that's proactive and looking to the future and doing it before you're doing it reactively when you have to, or then when there might be other pressures. I think that's so important, and it opens up opportunities to try things out and to be able to ask those questions and to be able to do it without those added pressures of saying we need this yesterday.
One of those great gifts of life, right? That we don't know what's coming next. And when folks ask, like, who's going to be on this team and who's going to help and how do I know they'll stick around? One of the things I often pose is, if you were ever married, think about the people who were in your wedding party, probably the people you knew and loved and were closest with at that point in your life. Are they still the same 4, 5, 6, 12 people with whom you spend most of your time and are closest with? Probably not universally, but over time, folks come in and out of our lives. And that doesn't mean because someone leaves, no one else is ever going to be there, right? We are just trusting and knowing that, wow, many thousands of years of human existence and my personal experience and anyone I've ever known has told me that, yes, folks can come in and out of your life, and that's okay. And especially when you're seeking someone with a particular level of dedication or expertise, you're going to have your eyes peeled, and the rest of your support team will too, right? You're never alone in supported decision making, which is the piece that's so wonderful. Instead of saying, I have to find the next person to help me with this or someone to help me figure this out, your team can help you find that person. And instead of one person tapping upon their networks, you've got a whole group of people tapping upon their networks and reaching out to really find good folks to help along the way. Any other final questions before we wrap up today? Okay, I'm not seeing any, but I'm also not going to stop you from popping them up if something comes to mind. So I wanted to give one more final thank you to Eric from Feig Mediation Group for sponsoring our workshop today. I want to really encourage folks to check him out, to check out the resources at the Arc of Northern Virginia, and be in touch with us anytime as you're navigating this. Navigating family relationships and support teams and long-term support planning is something that's tricky, and sometimes tricky at unexpected times. Thank you all so much for being here. Stay well.